All right, good morning, everybody. Can you all hear me? All right, so I'd like to wish you a warm welcome on this beautiful Sabbath day. And it's a pleasure to be with you in this house of God today. And for those watching online, we give you a warm welcome as well. Is that the camera right there? Just in the middle, just so I know. Right underneath the screen, is that the camera? Yes? All right, okay. So for our Sabbath school this morning, I'm going to talk about world missions. And I left home when I was just turned 18, and I went off to Israel for a gap year before I went to college. I wasn't sure quite what I wanted to do. So I went off to Israel for a gap year. I grew up in a pastoral family in England, mostly in large Jamaican churches. And so we grew up with like a Jamaican patties, which are very delicious actually, and all kinds of Jamaican food. And we used to play dominoes on Sabbath nights after Sabbath with our Jamaican brothers. And then when they play dominoes, there's like a little brass knuckle on the dominoes, and you slam it down on the table, and all the other dominoes jump off the table. You see, it's kind of good fun. But anyway, I went off to Israel at the age of 18 for a gap year, and I went off there about a week after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. My parents thought, well, are you sure this is a good idea? Because Desert Shield was starting before Desert Storm. And when you're young and single, you feel like you're invincible, don't you? So I went off into the middle of what turned into a war zone, and it was a great adventure, at least from my perspective, a lot of answers to prayer. But I realized that when I went off to Israel that the needs of the unreached are vast, and they're growing. And so I've spent most of my adult life outside of my home country, that is the UK, and that's been about, 32, 33 years now away from the UK. It goes fast, actually, life. And living in dozens of countries around the world. And so I want to share with you today something about the scale of the task that we're still facing as we talk about the unreached. So if I were to ask you the question, approximately how many people live on planet Earth today, what would your answer be, give or take? Yeah, correct. It's about, let's say, 7.5 billion people. And that number is growing all the time. And so it's about 7.5 billion people. So I'm going to need 15 volunteers to stand up here with me. So those young or young at heart, I'm looking for 15. Okay, there's 2 here. Did your wife just volunteer you? Okay. Greater love hath no man than this, that a wife who volunteers him. All right, come. You can come and stand up then. So we need 15 people up here. Yeah, 3 young guys at the back there. Do you want to come up? And so if you can stand on the platform here, a row of 15 of you, and then we'll see how many we've got. So we've got 3 here, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Thank you, young man. So we need 5 more. That's 11, 12, 13, 14. One more. Lady, were you standing up there, sister? Do you want to come up? Yes? Okay. So let's just make sure we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. All right, 15. No, yeah, we need you up there. So I just want to make sure we get this lined up right. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, can you come in here? You can come and stand here. And you, sir, can you come and stand over here? You'll understand why in a minute, okay? So if there are 15 people on the stage in front of you now, so if there are 7.5 billion people on planet Earth, how many people does each of these individuals represent? Divide 7.5 billion by 15, what do you get? 500 million. All right, so this young man here represents 500 million people, okay? And so each of these are 7.5 billion people. So that represents planet Earth today, okay? And now, as Christians, we tend to think the gospel's gone to the whole world, yes? No? Yes, no? Jesus said this gospel of the kingdom will be preached to what? All nations, and then as a testament to them, and then the end shall come. So we're going to divide the world here this morning. And who's the, what's your name, brother? David. Do you want to stand at this end then? So David here, this is a Bible. So David here represents 500 million people, and he represents, you might say, the born-again Christians in the world today who actually are interested in sharing the gospel. There's about 1.5 billion Christians in the world today, approximately, and many of them are Christians in case of emergencies. All right? And so there are Christians who go to churches because they've got a hatching, matching, or dispatching. Hatching is a christening or dedication. Matching is a burial, or dispatching is a burial, okay? And I can assure you as a pastor, these days the best thing to do is a burial rather than a wedding. Because at a wedding, lots of things can go wrong. But at a burial, nothing worse can go wrong. So you're kind of okay. If you bury the wrong person by mistake, you're okay. So David here represents 500 billion Christians, and that's a very generous estimate. Because most Christians are not interested in sharing their faith. They say that they are, but they never do. Most Christians would run a mile rather than give their personal testimony. Most Christians wouldn't be able to give a gospel presentation in 30 seconds. Most Christians don't know the difference between the Old and the New Testament. Or if you said, where are the Beatitudes found, or where are the Ten Commandments found, where's the crucifixion of Jesus found, they'd struggle. So David here represents 500 million Christians, but that's a really generous estimate in the world today. And how many Adventists are in the world today? Yeah, about 22 million. So in America, the figures never tell the truth, all right? So if you go to parts of Africa, you may go to a church that officially has 200 members, but actually has 600 members every Sabbath. That's common all across Africa. And when you come to America, you have a church that officially has 300 members, but it has 50 people on a Sabbath morning, all right? So the numbers are they're very misleading at times. So anyway, David here represents the born-again Christians, want to share the gospel, and if David represents 500 million, so the Adventists, lift up your little finger, my friend. So the Adventists represent this little finger here, and of the Adventists, I'm glad you raised that finger, the Adventists who are committed to sharing the gospel represent maybe your little nail here. All right? So that little nail has somehow to collect with all these other people up here. That's a big task, yes? Now, standing next to David, we have the rest of the Christians of the world. And if you can put one of these around your necks. So the label reads, in name only. So I'm sorry to pick on these three guys. This was a random process, you understand? Yes? So these three young men, handsome young men, yes, brother. Well, the older I get and the whiter I get, the greater the definition of young appears to be, yes? So these three young men here represent those Christians of the world who really, as I've just described a few minutes ago, they're not that engaged in gospel work. They just want to come to church, sometimes occasionally, and they don't want the church to make any ethical demands on their behavior. So these are Christians who maybe believe in cheap grace, that we are saved by grace, but God does not expect repentance or confession or a change of life in return. And so these people, they go to church, at Christmas. If you're lucky, they maybe go to an Easter play. They really don't know their Bibles, and in their hands they have a bulb. And what do you notice about that bulb? There's no light. So Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount that you are the what? Light of the world, and you are the salt of the earth. And here you have these three Christians, and they are nominally Christian. They have the form of Christianity, but they actually are not shining for Jesus. And that's the overwhelming majority of Christians in our world today. Would you agree with me? Yes? Yeah. All right. And that includes Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox, Charismatics, Evangelicals, Pentecostals, and each faith tradition has a different kind of emphasis. So the Orthodox, we talk about smells and bells, the Orthodox churches. The Orthodox churches, they believe that theology stopped developing in about the 12th century when the church split between East and West. And therefore, the Orthodox believe that the church cannot grow in theology until the church is united globally. And until that happens, Orthodox theology focuses not so much on a systematic theology, they focus on the experience of God, which is why Orthodox churches have incense for the nose, they have beautiful choral music for the ears, they have icons and gold and silver for the eyes, and then you taste the emblems, okay? So they're connecting you with all five of your senses. So those three guys there, and they're Christians in name only. Now, the three guys that live next to them, I'm going to... So if you can put that on, and then here you are. Your parents here? Okay, parents, please take pictures of this, all right? You can put that on your head. And you can put that around your neck. These handsome young men, okay, there you are. Or at least they present as men this morning. That goes on there. That's for you. That's for you. And that's for you. Okay, so these cool cats up here this morning, they represent the 1.5 billion people today who live in reach of the gospel, but they are thoroughly secular. These are people who live in Redding, California, who live in Sacramento, who live in your town here in California, and there's a church on every corner, and if you turn on the radio station, there's going to be Christian music, and you can go down to Barnes & Noble and buy rows of Bibles, and you can go to the internet and click on AWR or Hope TV or the Trinity Broadcasting Network or whatever it is, and these people live in reach of the gospel. Many of their neighbors are professing Christians. They have neighbors who are Adventists, and every Sabbath, these people, when they wake up, they see their Adventist friends going to church on a Sabbath morning, but their Adventist friends have mostly never spoken about what they're doing. And these three young men here represent 1.5 billion people. They live in the big cities of the world today, the major urban conurbations, the universities of our worlds today, all around the world. And you can travel to almost any country on planet Earth today, and young people are all looking at Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram and Google. So we have like the Google generation now. And it's destroying many communities around the world. And what we're seeing around the world is when people move from the rural areas to the urban areas in the process of urbanization, there's a parallel process of secularization taking place. Whether it's in Muslim countries, the Hindu world, the Buddhist world, when people live their traditional communities and go into the city and you become anonymous, nobody cares what you do or who you are, faith of anything kind of dissipates. So these three young men here, now, I've given them, the rainbow hat here, and so representing alternate lifestyles. In their hands, they have modern-day idols, otherwise known as iPhones or iPads or iPods. But they're modern-day idols, all right? That's what they are. And particularly for teens, these things are all-consuming. Yes, if you've raised a teenager, you realize that, we're not evolving, as the evolutionists would say, because teenagers, they kind of communicate in grunts, okay? And if they communicate at all, and so sometimes you actually have to text your teenagers to get a response from them, because they're not going to respond to you otherwise. A friend of mine recently was sitting on his couch, and it wasn't me, okay? It was a friend of mine, and he wanted his kid to get something from the kitchen, and her phone was in the kitchen, so he texted his daughter, and she went to the kitchen because the text went off, and the text said, "Please bring me a drink back to the living room." All right? That was the only way that could happen, all right? But this 1.5 billion people, they have Christian neighbors, Christian radio, churches on their corners, access to Bibles, and yet they are overwhelmed. They're consumed by the gods of this world. Technology. You see the guy with the green glasses. What's he got on his glasses? Money. They're blinded by the gods of this world. And so this is your neighbor here in Redding or in Northern California. And this guy, David here, he's really struggling because who's he going to share his faith with? And if he's the Adventist, where are the Adventists on your body again, David? Just the little nail there. Those are the Adventists who are interested in sharing their faith. Where's that little Adventist going to go? And that's in the part of the world, this slot here, that has easy access to the gospel. So I'm going to talk about this side of the world here now. And so this is it's a hijab. Yes, please. Yeah. That looks good. Now, there are many different styles of hijab. There you are. And that bit there is supposed to go over your forehead. But I've never put it. Can you help her put it on? Okay. I've never put on a hijab for myself, so I'll have to do this up there. For our young man here, though, I've put one of these on in the past, so let me just fold this for you. Yeah, and those turn around at the back there. Turn around. He's Arab, yes. Yes, all right. So, these three handsome individuals have not just apostatized from Adventism this Sabbath morning. Which part of the world do they represent? The Muslims. And how many Muslims are in the world today? Approximately. Yeah, it depends how you count it. Of course, in Islam, they have no problem with church growth, because if you leave, you're going to get killed, all right? So, once you're in Islam, that's it. Otherwise, apostates get killed. So they represent, let's say, 1.3, 1.5 billion people on planet Earth today. Now, the Islamic world is really divided into three main groups: the Sunnis, the Shias, and the Sufis. And they correspond to the Catholics, the Protestants, and the Charismatics. And the Sufis, let's say this guy is a Sufi here, the Sufis are disenchanted with classical Islam because it's very dry, and so they try and have a direct connection with God as they understand it. So they dance in circles, and they take some potions, and they're trying to have a direct connection with God. It's very, very similar to Jewish mysticism. And they are condemned by the Sunnis and the Shias. Now, the Sunnis, our sister here represents the Sunnis, about 80-85% of the Muslim world. That's the vast majority. And the word Sunnah means the Sunnah is following the way of Muhammad, the path of Muhammad. So we follow the life of Jesus. Sunni Muslims, they will dress and eat and do everything in their life according to the Sunnah of Muhammad. And she represents about 85% of the Muslims, and this lady represents about 10-12%, which are the Shias. They're mostly in Iraq and southern and Iran. And this lady is Sunni, so she represents Muslims around much of the rest of the world. Now, the Shias, they believe that when Muhammad died, they believe that the gift of prophecy didn't stop with Muhammad, but his two grandsons, and they carried on the gift of the prophetic gift, and it carried on through either 5 generations or 7 generations or 12 generations. So the Aga Khan, the Swiss businessman, he's leader of the Ismaili Muslims. They're fivers. That's the fivers for the Shias. And the Iranian regime, they're 12ers, which means they go down to the 12th rightly guided imam, and he disappeared into a cave in Karbala, where we were fighting in 2003, and they believe he's going to reappear. And that's the return of the Mehdi. You've heard of the Mehdi army in Iraq? These are jihadis fighting for the return of the Mehdi. And when he returns, the world is going to be bathed in fire, and that will usher in the return of Jesus. So when you think of the Iranian regime wanting to get nuclear weapons, part of their eschatology is when the world is bathed with fire, it will usher in the return of Jesus and the destruction of Christianity and Judaism. So it's kind of a terrifying prospect for these guys to get their hands on weapons, because they have an incentive to use it. Whereas the Sunnis here, they have the Quran, and they have the Hadith, those are the sayings of Muhammad, and then they combine those into something called the Sharia law. And the Sharia law is the holy law of Islam. And we're not that much different. We have the Bible, and then we have the writings of Sister White, and we combine that into the church manual. Okay? And then the Catholics, they have the Bible, and they combine that with the traditions of the church, the councils of the church, and that gets turned into canon law. And in Judaism, you have the Torah, the Old Testament. You combine that with the traditions of the elders that Paul upheld. You can buy those today. It's known as the Mishnah and the Babylonian Gemara, and they combine that into what we now know as the Talmud. Okay? So all these major faiths have got a very, very similar structure. And so this lady represents the Sunnis, and if you're following the news, Sunni Islam is in crisis right now. For a couple of reasons. One is, and if you have Muslim neighbors, you should know this, the first reason it's in crisis is because a number of years ago, there was a Turkish lady who went to teach Arabic in Morocco, which is like teaching Eskimos how to build ice houses, you know. But that's what she was doing. And she went into a shop and she said, "Can I buy a copy of the Quran in Arabic?" And the shopkeeper said, "Which version?" And this was like an earth-shaking question, because the Muslims say there's only one version of the Quran, and the proof for the veracity of Islam is that Allah has miraculously preserved the Quran. There's a golden version in heaven. God gave it to Muhammad. The word Quran means to recite. Muhammad just recited apparently what he was allegedly given. And then God has preserved that book miraculously through the last 1,400 years. And when that bookseller said, "Which version do you want?" she said, wait, there's only one version of the Quran. He said, "No," he says, "I've got 4 different versions of the Quran here." So she bought them, and she started studying them, and she realized that these versions of the Quran were actually quite different. So she went on a global search for all the authorized versions of the Quran, and she came up with about 26, 27 versions all around the world. And these versions are not insignificant. The differences are not insignificant. It's like the Bible has the Apocrypha or it doesn't. I mean, these are big differences. And it destroyed her faith in Islam, so she became a Christian. And she started a ministry in London, and every Friday she goes to Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, and she puts up a big stand with all these different versions of the Quran on it. And she says to these crowds of Somali immigrants in London, "So which is the Quran that you follow?" This is like a red flag to a bull. And about 18 months ago, somebody caught her with a machete, almost took her head off. It was streamed on YouTube. And by some miracle of God's grace, she survived. And she's now back at it in the park, challenging people. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, about a year and a half ago, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia gave an interview. And he wants to downplay the Wahhabi clerics because they're the driving spiritual force in the Saudi kingdom. So he said to the interview, he says, "The problem we have," he says, "that we don't know whether these hadith, these sayings of Muhammad, are genuine or not." And there was a shock on the interviewer's face. And he said, "We need to do away with most of these hadith, these sayings of Muhammad." He said, "Because unless it's in the Quran, then we cannot assume that it's true." Now, this is like Pastor Ted Wilson standing up at the GC and saying, "We need to do away with the spirit of prophecy." I mean, this is like an existential moment of crisis in the Islamic faith right now. And Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, he wants to destroy the power of Islam in Saudi Arabia so he can evolve into a modern market economy. And there's a struggle going on in Saudi Arabia right now and around the entire Muslim world whether we accept the hadith of Muhammad or not. And so this part of the world here is kind of in semi-crisis right now. 5 years ago, Islam was rising fast. Now it's almost imploding in on itself. Okay, so the whole landscape has changed dramatically. And Jesus is reaching into this group all the time. What's the primary method by which Jesus is reaching Muslims today? Dreams. Yeah, dreams and visions. And Jesus appears to Muslims night and day, men and women, boys and girls, and he invites them to follow him. It's very, very common, and he'll often heal their bodies. And the overwhelming majority of Muslims who become Christians have a vision of Jesus and they have a miraculous healing. And those are two things that you and I cannot engineer. You can't plan for that, you can't program for it, you can't budget for it. It's Jesus going ahead of us and inviting Muslims into his kingdom. And so these three here, Jesus is inviting them to, he's reaching behind the veil of Islam and inviting them to follow him. That's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing. And we in AFM have a project where we reach out to Muslims in multiple languages online who've had these dreams of Jesus. And what you find in that project, when Muslims post their dreams of Jesus, the number one theme you see time and again is the three angels' messages and the coming of Jesus in Revelation 19. All the time. He said, "I was in a dream, I saw three angels in the sky, and a man in white said, 'Listen to the messages of these angels. What does this mean?'" A very common dream that we get all the time. And we have family members of world-famous Muslim leaders, I won't say more than that because they're afraid for their lives, who've become Adventists, who are reaching out to Muslim women around the world and saying, "This was my story, and this is how Jesus appeared to me." One lady, she said, "Jesus appeared to me, and he healed me of my cancer, and now she works for us." And I said, "What does Jesus look like?" I'm kind of curious, yeah? She says, "He's like a mixture of fire and diamonds." And that's how she described Jesus. So, that's him. So, these two ladies here, now I've never put a sari on. Do you know how to put a sari? Oh, you do? Yeah, and it goes round and goes over your shoulder as well. My name is Vishnu. It is. Vishnu, the Hindu god. Okay. well. So if anybody here wants to dress up in a sari, take careful note of what you're about to watch. Okay, looks pretty good, yes? All right, so you're going to be a married woman for the purposes of this morning. Okay. So here we are. So these two ladies represent the Hindu part of the world. How many Hindus are approximately in the world today? About 1 billion. And what country do most Hindus live in the world today? India. And what do you know about Hinduism? Well, sorry? There are many gods. There are many, your name is Vishnu? Vishnu, okay. Vishnu. That's the name of one of the Hindu gods. Yes, yeah, okay. All right, so there's all kinds of Hindu gods, some, Ganesh and some of the others, and those Hindu gods are demons. Let's just cut to the chase here. They're real. Those stone idols, those wooden idols in Hindu temples are demons. And the Apostle Paul talks about that in 1 Corinthians 10. He says when the pagans bow down to idols, they're worshipping demons. And our missionaries who are in India, what they say is you can go to a Hindu festival, and at the height of the festival, they're calling on the spirits to come and possess the holy men, or the devtas as they're called, and the statues will come to life off the walls of the temples, and they will dance around the fire. At the end of the festival, the statues go back to the walls, and then they're wood or stone statues again. But these things are real, and these things have real power, because if a wise man, a holy man, he will invite his spirit to possess him, and then he will tell everybody at the festival what your secrets are and what's going on in your family. And people don't want that to happen, so they pay a lot of money to the devtas not to expose their secrets. And this is willful spirit possession by the Hindu holy men. Now, Hindus, are they vegetarian or are they meat eaters? And why are they vegetarian? Sorry? Yeah, reincarnation. And there's the cycle of life. And so, if you're good in this world, you come back in the next world as a Raja or as a prince. If you're bad in this world, you come back in the next generation as, a rat, something like that. So you have you're working your positive karma. And if you're a Hindu, you have multiple millions of cycles of reincarnation. Now, does that sound good to you, millions of cycles of reincarnation? How many good years do you get in life on average before you start falling apart physically? Like 16, 17? I don't know. 20? Depends on how you eat. All right, but if you were to tell me that, Conrad, you're going to have millions of cycles of reincarnation, what you're also telling me is that you're going to have millions of deaths, millions of heart attacks, millions of episodes of cancer, millions of episodes of dementia or Alzheimer's or diabetes or hypertension. That doesn't sound like good news to me, does it? No. And so Hindus have these endless cycles, and one day, if you're lucky, you achieve oneness with the global cosmic force, you might say, nirvana, and some call it nirvana, some other words for it. But you eventually dissipate into the global cosmic consciousness. You might say that if you're a drop of water, it disappears into the Atlantic Ocean. And the prospect, the good news of Hinduism, if you're really, really good for millions of cycles of life, one day you're going to become nothing. And you're going to be released from the cycles of life and death and life and death and life and death. Is that good news? It's terrible news. Terrible. It's horrible news, yes. I mean, it doesn't just mean multiple deaths, but multiple mothers-in-laws ad infinitum until one day you're free from your mother-in-law. So, can you dress as a Hindu monk? A Buddhist monk? Sorry? Nirvana. Yes. Do you know how to put one of these on? No, neither do I. So, can you just wrap it around your shoulders? Round here. Okay, we'll put that around your waist. Yeah. Do we have a bald man in church today? That would be better, because the Buddhist monks are all bald. So this guy represents the Buddhists of the world today. How many Buddhists are approximately in the world? 3 to 500 million. What countries are the Buddhists mostly gathered in? Southeast Asia, so Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia. There are Buddhists in India. There are Buddhists in China. and increasingly Buddhists in the West. Now, this guy here is dressed like this. If he were a monk, we'd shave his head for him this morning. And you can become a monk for a day, or for a week, or for a month, or for a year. Your parents can make you assign you to a monastery for whatever period of time they want. And the Buddhists, they also believe in reincarnation, and they also believe that your good works outweigh your bad works, and therefore they seek good works. So that's why the monks will often in the morning go out with their hands out begging for food, and people give them food, because in feeding the monks, you're building up good karma for the day, okay? And so the Buddhists, Buddhism technically doesn't believe in any spiritual being. Buddhism is technically a form of atheism. Like, they don't believe in God, they don't believe in Satan, yes, but in practice, they have the eightfold path to enlightenment, yes. But in practice, if you go to a Chinese or Thai restaurant in town, the moment you walk in, you look around the entrance somewhere, and you'll see somewhere on a shelf a statue of the Buddha, and there'll be a little bowl of rice, and maybe a joss stick, or an incense candle, or a bowl of rice, or Coca-Cola. Yes, you've all seen this? Yes. Now, this is not decoration. And if you go to Thailand, outside every public building, you'll see what is known as a spirit house, which is a piece of wood sticking up this high, and there's a platform, and it looks like a doll's house on it. And at the front of that doll's house, you've got, rice and milk and Coca-Cola, whatever it is they're choosing to put there. What are the Buddhists doing? Because they believe in reincarnation, they're trying to manipulate the spirits. They are afraid of spirits. And so by offering incense to the spirits or a meal to the spirits, they're hoping to get the spirits off their back. So what they're actually doing is the manipulation of spirits. Now, that is very common in Hinduism, and in Islam, that's extremely common. We don't think of Islam as as dealing with spirits, but it is. And why do I say that? No chance of making it through to paradise. Okay? And chapter 9 and verse 111 of the Quran is like John 3:16 to Christians. Think about those numbers, 9111. Does that ring a bell? 9111. 9/11 in the year 2001. That terrorist attack did not take place by chance on that day. Because that's the verse of the Quran that says that those that die in the way of Allah are guaranteed entrance to paradise. That's the assurance of salvation, dying in jihad. So Muslim women over here, if they're told they have almost no chance getting through to paradise, you have two options. You either become a suicide bomber, because that's pretty quick. Press a button, off you go, you're in paradise. They're not extremists, they're not radicals, they're seeking the assurance of salvation. You understand it from their perspective. But if they're not interested in that, they're going to get through this life with as little trouble from the spirits as possible. And they call the fallen angels jinn. Heard of the genie in the lamp? Aladdin and his little lamp, and out comes a spirit. It's a familiar spirit. This is the occult in Islam. And so many Muslim women, they will practice occultic practices. They'll talk about the evil eye, and they wear little jewelry with like a blue eye on it. It's made of glass, and that soaks up the evil eye. When it shatters, it's soaked up as much evil eye as it can, then they get another one. Or they may not take their children out for 40 days after birth to avoid someone putting a spell on that child. Or in some countries, they put urine on the kid's face when they go out because urine protects the kid from the evil eye, allegedly, all right? So many Muslim women practice folk Islam. Many Hindus are directly involved with spirits. And Buddhists, with their spirit houses, are also manipulating the spirits. So as we look at this part of the world, there's an awful lot of connection with fallen spirits. And if we look at this part of the world here, increasingly, there's connection with fallen spirits. And if we look at nominal Christians today, what they feed their minds with, there's a lot of connection with spirits. I mean, not articulated as such. And even among Bible-believing Christians today, there's a struggle going on between Christ and Satan and the spirits in their lives. So we have two characters left. So if you can put that on your face. And this guy here, Now he's not cross-dressing up here. He is actually legitimately wearing, turn around, you hold that there, turn it. Right, where's the top? Here it is. There's that braided bit, the string. There it is. Okay, so I have that string. So with the mask on, you don't know who this really is up here. All right, so there we are, young man. So, who does he represent? Animists. Yes. So this is a guy from Papua New Guinea, where they're missionaries. Now, you notice his skirt here. Why would they wear skirts like that in Papua New Guinea? Any idea? There's a real practical reason, actually. It's hot, and it's humid. And regular clothing just falls off you, just rots. So this is made of grass, and as he walks around, the air goes through the grass, and it stops it rotting. So it means his clothes are actually preserved in the humidity. It has a practical reason. And on his face, he has a mask. And that's often to do with the spirit, that is the spirit for the village, the spirit for the town, the ancestral spirit, because families have ancestral spirits. Somebody makes a sacrifice, they gain power and knowledge from the occult, but then their family line is devoted to that spirit forevermore. So he may be celebrating that with this particular mask. And so this guy here lives in abject fear of the spirits. And when you share the gospel with this guy, it's a very different gospel presentation to these people over here. Because these folks here have a sense of right and wrong and guilt in the Western worldview. But the animists, they're worried about the power of the spirits and who can set them free from the spirits. Exactly, yes. So when you talk about the gospel with animists, you're talking about the authority of Jesus over the forces of evil rather than his ability to forgive your sin. And when somebody in this part of the world is baptized, and in the Buddhist world as well, for them baptism is more a repudiation of Satan and his kingdom, and we're now stepping into the kingdom of God, rather than an act of repentance as we classically understand it in the West. Yes, there's idols here with Hindus and Buddhists as well. So these people here, they will offer a sacrifice, generally a pig or a chicken. These sacrifices are very popular. And whenever somebody gets married, all the rituals of life, marriage, engagement, birth, death, there's always going to be a sacrifice of a pig somewhere. We had a young student missionary who went off to Cambodia. She stayed with a local animist in the family, which is a house on stilts with one room. And she was sleeping there, and in the first week, they found a bush pig. And they hauled the bush pig into the house, that one room, and then they all hacked at it with their knives. And she was lying on the floor, and this blood was flying everywhere, and she wasn't quite sure what she was supposed to do with this. And was she supposed to join in the hacking? Was this a religious ceremony or not? It was a baptism of fire for that young lady. But anyway, she made it through. So these guys here, they live in fear of the spirits, and when these people are baptized, one of the things we do is we take this off. And when this young man gets baptized, what we'll do as missionaries is we take all the spirit paraphernalia, so they'll have the amulets around the wrists, sometimes there's a red string around the waist, sometimes there's bracelets, sometimes there's piercings on the body, sometimes there's things like this, wooden masks, and they'll put it in front of the house so the whole village can see it, and they pour gasoline on it, then they burn it. And that's what they did in Acts chapter 19 in the city of Ephesus. They burnt the books of magic. So they're burning their bridges. So this house now belongs to Jesus Christ. Then what happens is, let's say this is an animist village here. This is a young Adventist man here, and your daughter goes sick. And you're going to say, my daughter is sick because the spirits are angry with our village. They're angry because of him. If your daughter dies, she says, if my daughter dies, we're going to kill your daughter. That's the kind of pressure that happens today in animist communities. If this lady's cow gets sick, her buffalo gets sick and dies, we're going to kill your buffalo in revenge because you brought this problem on this village because you become an Adventist. This is what missionaries deal with all the time. This is why when somebody burns their bridges and burns their connection with the spirit world, there's a real battle going on in that community. But the good news is when people see that Jesus sets you free from the spirits, and he is a loving master, not a tyrannical master, when one person says yes to Jesus in a village, often the whole village will follow suit because they see that Jesus breaks the power of the spirits. Yep, it's why I love being in missions, brother. And then this guy, I'm sorry, I have nothing. I had some things from China, but I don't have them anymore. So this guy represents China, and that represents those who are formally taught about atheism today, the atheist parts of the world. It used to be the Soviet Union, but not so much anymore, the rise of orthodoxy there. But he represents the Marxist and the atheist parts of the world. Sorry? People's Republic of China, Vietnam is included in that list. Laos is still a communist country. There are still communist countries in our world today. And the head of the World Health Organization, the Ethiopian politician, is a communist. That's good news, isn't it? They're claiming with this new pandemic treaty they have the right to override all national laws, to impose rules. This is led by a communist from Ethiopia. So these people here are told there is no God, that religion is a thing of the past. During the Cultural Revolution in China, 65 to 75, it ended with Chairman Mao's death, they killed over 40 million people. Chairman Mao was responsible for about 65 million deaths while he was the chair of the Communist Party in China. And in the Cultural Revolution of China, they wanted to get rid of the old ways of thinking, the old ideas, the old practices, and the old habits. It was a cultural revolution, and we're going through a similar cultural revolution to that right now in America, and in very similar ideologies. And so these people here, in the communist world, we're seeing right now, and we've seen it actually since the 80s, there's a very large turning to Jesus in communist China. I'd encourage you to start reading the stories of the Chinese underground church. It's an incredible story. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, tens of millions of people became Christians all across China. There were resurrections, there were healings from leprosy, there was miracles. We haven't seen anything like it in the last 100 years, except in China. And now today, there are more Chinese who are Christians than there are members of the Chinese Communist Party. And so you might have 5 years where the Communist Party allows the churches to grow. Then they feel threatened, and they knock all those churches down, and they imprison the leaders. And then for the next 5 years, there's repression. Then the policy changes, and they open up the churches again, and the Christians rebuild their knockdown churches, and the church grows some more. And so the churches in China, there's kind of two basic churches. There's the official church, the three self-church, the three self-patriotic church, where they're self-financing, self-theologizing, and self-organizing. That is no foreign influence. And then you have the underground house networks. And the underground house networks are run like Walmart. They're extremely organized, they're extremely effective, and they're run like a military machine. And they often start around one charismatic preacher, many of them women. And they start up thousands of house churches, and they run it with an iron discipline. There's this famous story of one of the house church networks who wanted to send a Chinese evangelist into North Korea. And he was, 60 years old, and he said, I don't have a translator. So he said, well, here's a translator. She was a young Korean lady, age about 25. He says, I can't go into Korea with a young lady like this. And he says, that's not proper. They said, why not? He says, well, we're not married. I need a third person on the team. And the head of the house network said, well, he says, we'll just marry you this afternoon, and you can go in tomorrow. And that's what they did. So they run things like a military machine in these underground house churches, and they face a lot of persecution. There was a young lady who wrote what are known as the Songs of Canaan. These are church hymns from the persecuted Chinese church. There's about 1,500 of these songs, very famous in China. They're called the Canaan songs. So out of the suffering under communism, God has done something incredible for the people of China with the persecuted church. So this is the world today. Let's come back to David here. David, his little finger. And that's the Adventist church. All of them. Most of whom are not really engaged in mission. And this little finger here, where's he going to work with all these people here? Well, I was just looking at your offering plate, the budget there. But on average, if you put $100 into your offering plate here this Sabbath, probably less than 1 cent will go to reach this lot here. Almost nothing. Almost nothing. Overwhelmingly, where do we spend our money? We spend our money on this bit here. We spend it on our education system, on the heating, new chairs, new audiovisual systems. We spend it on ourselves overwhelmingly. Just look at your church budget. I'm not criticizing every church's budget is structured that way. And so we spend all of our money over there. We have little concern for almost anybody else in dollar terms. And in terms of life, like who's going to give parts of their life, I know that the Daniel Louis, the pilot who just died in Philippines, his parents come from this family, from this church, I understand. Yes, they come from this church here. And when you're out in the mission field, when Jesus says, pray the Lord of the harvest for more laborers, that prayer is really important. Because if one of you, let's say you have a pastor here and he leaves, within 6 months the church will have another pastor here. But if you're in Mali or Burkina Faso or Outer Mongolia and you leave, it may take 20 years for another Christian to turn up there. So if you want your life to have significance for God's kingdom, get involved in mission service. And you can do it here in California, be engaged in mission, or support missions overseas with your time, short-term missions, long-term missions, financially, sending letters of encouragement. Yeah, we can all do something locally, because that little finger has got to stretch very, very thin in order to reach all this lot over here. And they say for... No, that's China. China, yes, yeah. North Korean flag is very different. Yeah. So the final question is, they say for about every 140 Protestant pastors and Bible workers worldwide, one of them works with this lot across here. And 139 work with this lot here. So if you look at the North California Conference, how many workers does Northern California Conference have with this group here? Almost zero, even within the Northern California territories. This is the jarring reality of missions. But when you're a missionary, you have no idea of the ripple effect of what you're going to do. I'll give you one illustration. Many years ago, I was in Azerbaijan. I used to visit the Prime Minister every month. I was working with ADRA. We fed about 700,000 people a month, had about 60 clinics in the mountains. And so I'd go and visit the Prime Minister, and I'd talk with him. I noticed that he was diabetic. And so I called my mum in England, and I said, what are those things that test your blood sugar? Glucosometer, is that it? And so I said, can you send me a glucosometer in the mail? So she did. Next month, I went to visit the Prime Minister. I gave him a glucosometer and said, this is how you use it, help you control your blood sugar a bit better. He was so grateful. And next month, I went to see him, and there had been a scandal where his son had staged his own kidnapping and extorted money from his father. And the father was now a laughingstock in the country, and he was experiencing a lot of shame. And so I said to this communist prime minister, I said, do you mind if I pray for you and your family? And he was kind of shocked. He says, I put people in prison like you. I said, yeah, but I'd like to pray for you. So he sent all his aides out of the room. I stood there with a colleague, and we prayed in Russian for this prime minister. Now, did he become a Christian? No. But many months later, the government was pushing a bill through Parliament to ban all Protestants from that country. All Protestants were going to be closed down. But that prime minister intervened. He said, yes, everybody else, but not the Adventists. They're good people. So we're still registered in that country. What I'm saying is, when you engage in mission, you don't know the power of the ripple effect. You put the pebble in the pond, and that ripple goes out and out and out. And it goes to places you have no idea it's going to go. So I want to challenge you today as a congregation to be involved in missions. Right now you have the Louis family who are grieving the loss of their son. And that's a terrible loss. His family are out there in the Philippines. There was an American girl who used to work for AFM as the nurse. She was on their helicopter that went down. And her parents live in Alaska. So there's some grieving families right now. But I would say this, that if you want your life to have a significance for God that you cannot calculate or fathom, prayerfully consider mission service. It's tough. You won't see your families for years at a time. Your kids you'll get malaria, probably. Malaria is the best weight loss reduction mechanism known to man. You get malaria 4 times a year, you can eat whatever you want the rest of the year, guaranteed. Okay, because you're going to lose 40 pounds a year in malaria. And when we get young ladies coming to be student missionaries with AFM, and they're like skinny as rakes, and you sit down with them before they launch with their father, and the dad says, what advice would you give my daughter before she goes to the Philippines or Papua New Guinea? I say, put on 10 pounds before you go, because you're going to lose it the first time you get malaria. It'll come off in a week. So a life of mission service is a life of adventure with God. It's a life away from your family, and some missionaries don't come home, as we saw with these missionaries that died just recently. On the other hand, raising your kids in a Muslim country is probably a lot safer spiritually than raising them in America right now. Raising your kids in a Muslim country, they don't get this transgender ideology. They're not going to get all this other nonsense that's out there. There are certain benefits to raising your kids in countries where this nonsense of the West is yet to penetrate. So they've been great actors and actresses, yes? Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, everybody. And can you leave all your stuff just on the thing here? And thank you very much. And we'll just let them put everything back. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, some people. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, just as we're mentioning the Philippines here, they're still searching for survivors. And there is a possibility they landed on an uninhabited island because we understand they may be short of fuel. We just don't know. It looks so far like the worst is true, but we still pray that somehow they made it themselves to an island and that they're safe. So please keep that in your prayers. That's an important thing. We say in AFM there are 3 things you can do for missions. The first is pray. Everybody here can pray. Pray that the gospel will go to the ends of the earth in this generation. When we catch a vision of taking the gospel to the world in this generation, it moves us and inspires us like never before. There's something that everybody can do. So start praying. Secondly, start giving. That may be financially, maybe a mission project, a student missionary from your church, maybe somebody going on a Maranatha trip, or a Share Him evangelistic series. You may have a young person doing 1 year in mission, or AVS, or an AFM missionary. Doesn't really matter who it is. But if somebody comes to your congregation and says, I want to be a missionary, give of your time and give of your finances. Also open your homes. Missionaries, when they're on furlough, don't have a home. They sell their homes before they go overseas. When they come back to the States, they've got nowhere to live, oftentimes. And they travel on furlough for 3 or 4 months from church to church. They need somewhere to live, and they often need a car to drive in. So if you're aware of a missionary in the country, and you have a spare car, or you've got a room in your basement, they'd be very grateful for you to give of what God has blessed you with. And then the third thing is you can go. And if you go, you're going to get a lot of stories that you can share with your grandkids, stories about crocodiles and rogue elephants and all kinds of nasties out there. But you're also going to get stories about seeing God at work in incredible ways outside of our cultural norm in America. And as we serve overseas, it broadens our understanding of how wonderful God really is. And so you can go as a student missionary. You can go as a short-term missionary. For AFM, that's 1 or 2 years. Or you may sense God's call to go as a career missionary. And a career missionary is somebody that says it can be male or female, married or single, it doesn't matter. But I sense God's calling to be a full-time missionary, a career like this. I'm going to make this my life career. And I'm going to spend the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years with a certain people group planting churches where there is no Christians today. That's still 40, 45% of the world. This is a life calling worth following. It really is, yeah. It's a life following worth following. And you get to see God at work in incredible ways. And I've been working with AFM and with ADRA, with the church in mission work ever since I was about 21. And that's almost 30 years. I hate to say that. And yes, you cry tears of joy and tears of sorrow. And you find yourself in very difficult situations. You may get beaten up, ostracized, have a mob come at you. You get attacked by demons. You get, cigarettes stubbed out on your body. You may be put in prison. These things happen today to missionaries. Your body is a battleground. And that blood-stained banner, when we plant it in some foreign shore, that blood is often the blood of your children. Because Satan attacks missionary kids to discourage the missionary parents from staying in the mission field. Those kids are assaulted physically and otherwise by local community members to drive the missionaries out of their community. So it's not an easy life. It's not a romantic life. It's not a glamorous life. But you're all familiar with the advert by Shackleton, yes? He wants to explore, he wants to walk across Antarctica, and he posted an ad in the London Times. He said, "Wanted men willing to work in extended periods of complete darkness, low pay, extreme danger, extreme cold, return home unlikely." And thousands of men applied to that ad because they wanted a life lived that had purpose and meaning and meant something, had significance. And we also have platinum missionaries. So if your hair is the color of mine, and I won't say any more than that. If your hair is the color of mine, like mine, and your kids have left home and you've got no debts, and you've got on Medicaid or Medicare or you're in retirement, we have platinum missionaries. So if your hair is platinum colored like mine, there are parts of the world where we need people like that. Because there are parts of the world today that value the wisdom that gives you hair that looks like this. And you can still serve, go for 1 year at a time. And there are still places like that for people in retirements to serve on the front lines. It's an incredible experience. Brother Dr. Abbey, who was sitting back over there, his brother and his wife, they retired from Union College after 40 years of teaching, and they went off to Southeast Asia with AFM for about 8 to 9 years in their late 60s and upper 70s. And it's still possible to do that these days. So there's never a time when you can say, "Lord, there's nothing I can do." So I'd encourage you today to think about praying, giving, or going. There's something that all of us can do. And when Jesus comes again, all human suffering comes to an end. Okay? If you want a good motivation for being a missionary, when Jesus comes again, there's no more death, there's no more disease, there's no more broken bodies, no more broken homes, no more opioid overdoses and addictions. All human suffering comes to a shuddering halt on that day. And all animal suffering comes to a halt on that day. Now, that's something that I want to get behind. And that day will come when this gospel is preached to all nations as a witness. So you can contribute in a material way to the end of all suffering in this universe, out on planet Earth, by being a frontline worker. So if you're interested in this, I'm here for today, I'm here this afternoon. We have magazines out there in the foyer. Take a magazine, connect with me today. That's it there, brother, yes. Thank you, brother, for lifting it up. Thank you. So, thank you very much. Thank you. And if you're interested, come and chat with me today. Check out our website. If you don't want to go with AFM, then think of a Maranatha trip or a Share Hymn trip or 1 year in mission, or do something. And when you do something, you get to see God at work in incredible ways. So let's bow our heads and we'll close our Sabbath school with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, I want to thank you that the gospel came to California many years ago, and that today we are the beneficiaries of those who brought the gospel from the Middle East to the west coast of the U.S. And I ask, Father, that gospel will not stop with us, that we will not hoard that living water till it becomes a stagnant pool. But I pray that we will be channels of your grace, that your love and your mercy and your Holy Spirit will flow through us as a stream of living water to bless our homes, our city, our church, our neighbors, and that we will be witnesses in this city and in California and in the northern hemisphere and to the ends of the earth. Lord, may this church be a light on a hill that cannot be hid. Father, bless those who have launched from this church. Bless those who are going to launch. Father, we lift up before you those who are grieving at this time. And I pray, Lord, that when Jesus comes again, I pray that if indeed those people have passed away on that sea of glass, there'll be multitudes there because of the sacrifice they made. So, Lord, fill us with your Spirit. Show us the paths that we are to take. And may your love be heard and seen in all that we say and do. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. So we'll conclude our Sabbath school now, and we'll begin, what time? Anybody know when we start work?